The wind howled low across the desolate stagecoach stop, lifting fine dust into the golden evening air. A rickety wooden bench sat crooked under a brittle sign that read, Oak Hollow. Nobody was around. No stagecoach. No horse. Only the whisper of wind, and the still form of a woman collapsed near the trough. She wore a nurse's dress, worn, stained with travel, her bonnet twisted as if she'd fallen hard. One gloved hand clutched a torn satchel, the other rested limply against the dry earth. Her lips were pale, her breath shallow. Then came the sound of boots. Deliberate, heavy, echoing off emptiness. A tall figure emerged from the haze. Leather coat, dusty hat, a rifle slung across his back. His face was shadowed beneath the brim, but his movements were precise. Calm, he crouched beside her without a word, checking her pulse, brushing her hair from her face. Gently, like someone who knew loss too well to let another fade. Her eyes fluttered open. You all right, miss? His voice was deep, steady, like a storm held back by willpower alone. She blinked. The world around her swam. Where's the coach? Gone, he said simply. You fainted. Heat, maybe, or something worse. She tried to sit up, but he steadied her. Easy now. Despite the roughness of his appearance, there was a tenderness in his hands, calloused. Yes, but reassuring. She stared at him, uncertain whether to feel fear or safety. I'm fine, she whispered, even though her lips trembled. Just got dizzy. Long journey. He looked over her things. No water, no food, just worn medical tools and a prayer book. You a nurse? Yes, Clara. Her voice cracked. Clara Merton. I was heading west. To help. He nodded once. Slowly. Name's Callum. You can't stay here. Clara. Too exposed. Stagecoach won't come again till morning. If at all. I'll manage, she insisted, but her hands betrayed her, trembling like leaves in wind. Callum stood, then held out a hand. You're coming with me. She hesitated. Everything about this man screamed danger, his rifle, his silence, the lines etched deep into his face. Yet there was something else too. A sadness, a weight, as if he'd once lost someone like her, and had vowed never again. Clara took his hand. As he pulled her to her feet, she staggered. Without a word, he lifted her satchel, slung it over his shoulder, and guided her to a dark mare tied behind the signpost. The horse stamped as if impatient with the delay. I can walk, Clara offered weakly. Callum shook his head. You'll ride. Cabin's a few miles in. Safer there. Together they rode into the dusk, her hands clinging to the saddle horn. His form steady behind her as the forest swallowed the trail. She glanced back once at the fading stop, uncertain if she was escaping danger or riding deeper into it. But something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, she'd been found at exactly the right time. Hope, fragile as dawn, began to stir in her chest. Blank. Blank. The forest wrapped around them like a living silence. Shadows of pine and cedar leaned close as if to listen, their branches whispering secrets above the trail. Clara clutched the saddle tighter. Her strength hadn't fully returned, and every bounce of the horse made her ribs ache. Still, she stayed quiet, watching Callum's broad back as he led the way on foot. Reins in hand. She couldn't read him. Not yet. Was he a rancher? A soldier? An outlaw? His face was unreadable, save for the occasional glance back to make sure she hadn't slipped or slumped. Each time, his eyes held something unexpected, not suspicion or calculation, but concern, a quiet kind of care. They arrived just as dusk fell into full darkness. The cabin was tucked deep in the trees, nearly invisible save for the faint curl of chimney smoke. It wasn't large, just 2 rooms and a narrow porch, but it looked sturdy. Safe. A lantern glowed faintly inside, casting gold across the rough-hewn walls. Callum helped her down with practiced hands. I'll boil water. You sit, he said, pointing toward a wooden bench near the fire pit. Clara obeyed, breathless. Her legs barely held her. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly clean. A shelf of worn books. A rifle over the hearth. A dried bundle of lavender hung from a ceiling beam. Not the home of a lawless man, but one who had lived with ghosts, and chosen peace where he could find it. He returned with a tin cup of warm water and broth. Clara drank in silence, her hands trembling from more than just fatigue. She was used to being the one who helped, who fixed things, but now, she was the one in need. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come, she said quietly. Callum shrugged, crouching to stir the fire. Fate has a strange way. Do you live out here alone? Mostly. His answers were short, guarded, but not unkind. She watched the firelight flicker across his face, scarred near the jaw. Sun-browned, with tired eyes that had seen too many long rides and not enough peace. And yet, he moved with gentleness. The way he placed a blanket over her shoulders without a word. The way he poured another cup of water and waited for her to take it. I was on my way to Riverton, she said softly, more to fill the silence than to explain. They need nurses. Typhoid's taken hold. I thought I could help. Callum didn't answer immediately. My sister died of that, he finally said. No one came in time. Clara looked up. I'm sorry. So am I, he replied. But his voice carried no bitterness, only quiet memory. Outside, the wind picked up. Wolves howled faintly in the distance. Clara leaned toward the fire, drawing in its warmth. You didn't have to help me, she said. You didn't even know me. Callum stood and leaned against the doorframe, his silhouette framed by the stars. I didn't need to. You needed help. That was enough. Hope flared in her chest again, not the desperate hope of survival, but something deeper, the kind that says, there is still good in this world. Even in the dark, even in men like him. That night, she slept on a cot near the fire, wrapped in flannel and safety. And just before sleep took her, she whispered a quiet prayer, not just of thanks for rescue, but for the man who had given it freely. A man who, in saving her, had unknowingly saved something in himself. Blank. Blank. Morning came softly through the cracks in the log walls. Sunlight poured in golden streaks, touching the wooden floor and resting gently on Clara's cheek. She stirred, the warmth of the fire still clinging to her skin. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was, only that it was quiet. Safe. Then the scent of coffee reached her. Callum was already up, leaning over the stove in the corner. The pot rattled faintly as he poured 2 tin cups. He glanced over his shoulder as she sat up, blanket slipping from her shoulders. Didn't mean to wake you, he said. You didn't, she replied, rubbing her eyes. I don't remember the last time I slept like that. He handed her a cup, then sat across the room near the window, rifle resting by his knee. His eyes, though calm, never stopped moving, scanning the tree line, listening for something. You're expecting company? Clara asked, noting his vigilance. Not the kind you'd want to greet with coffee. Her smile faded. You have enemies. It wasn't a question. It was a truth that had walked through the front door the night before. Quiet and unspoken. Callum didn't answer immediately. He sipped from his cup, then set it down. I used to ride with a crew. After the war, thought we were rebuilding something. But it turned into taking land. Horses. Worse. I walked away. And they didn't. He nodded. Some men don't forgive leaving. Especially when you know what they've done. Clara looked down at her hands, the warmth in her chest dimming beneath the weight of his words. But you saved me. I don't know if that makes up for what I didn't stop before. It's not about what you were, she said softly. It's about who you are now. Callum looked at her fully then, really looked. His expression, usually stone, cracked just slightly. I'm not used to being believed in. Then it's time someone did. The fire popped quietly between them, a kind of punctuation to the silence. Outside, birds called through the trees. But beneath it all, Clara felt something deeper, an undercurrent of tension, of danger pressing closer. Will they come? She asked. Maybe, if they hear I'm still breathing. And if they do? Callum stood and walked to the cupboard, retrieving a second rifle. He placed it gently on the table between them. Then we fight. Clara stared at the weapon, then at him. But I'm a nurse. He met her eyes. And I'm just a man trying to be better. Hope can be a fragile thing, but in that moment, it burned brighter, not because everything was certain, but because it wasn't, because danger was coming. And yet, for the first time in a long time, neither of them would face it alone. The conflict hadn't arrived yet, but its shadow stretched long and cold across the forest. And in that quiet before the storm, love didn't retreat. It stood tall. Blank. The cabin breathed with quiet life. As the days passed, Clara and Callum fell into a rhythm, silent, unspoken, yet oddly comforting. The world beyond the tree line might have been waiting with claws bared. But inside the cabin, time moved gently. Meals were simple, mornings filled with warmth, evenings with firelight and the hum of healing. Clara spent her hours tending to the garden behind the cabin, small, but blooming with wild herbs and a few stunted vegetables. Her hands, so used to stitching wounds and holding trembling patients, now found solace in soft soil and green leaves. Callum built her a small bench from leftover pine. He didn't say anything when he gave it to her. Just left it by the garden one morning with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes, but lingered longer than usual. Every gesture became a thread in something growing between them. Not romance in the traditional sense, not yet. But something purer. A quiet trust. A shared silence that didn't demand explanations. When Clara laughed, soft and surprised at her own clumsiness, Callum would glance at her as though the sound was something he hadn't heard in years. Maybe he hadn't. In the evenings, they talked. Not of danger. Not of blood or war or what waited beyond the trees, but of little things. Her childhood in Pennsylvania, his favorite book from a forgotten past, the way snow used to pile high in Missouri winters. He showed her a faded photo, creased from years in his coat pocket, a younger Callum. A woman beside him, a child. My wife and daughter, he said, voice quiet. Clara didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. I ran, he added after a pause. From it all. Grief, shame. I thought I was protecting what was left of me. She looked at him, eyes soft. And now? He didn't answer. But the next morning, she found an extra blanket folded neatly at the foot of her cot. And when she tripped in the garden, he was at her side before she hit the ground, steadying her. One strong arm around her waist. Their eyes locked, breath held in the space between them. Neither pulled away right away. I'm not used to being looked after, she whispered. Well, he said, voice low, we'll take turns then. The cabin was small, but in its walls, something precious grew. Not just healing, not just safety, but the slow, patient rise of hope. Even when the wind howled louder through the trees, and the birds went quiet for too long. Even when Callum started checking the perimeter twice a day. Rifle always close. Even when he caught fresh boot prints by the river, half covered in mud. He didn't tell Clara at first, but she saw it in the way he lingered near the window. The way his fingers flexed around the rifle. And one evening, she caught him staring into the fire with a look she hadn't seen before, not weariness, but resolve. They're close, aren't they? She asked. He nodded. Could be days, maybe hours. She took a breath. Fear stirred, but didn't overwhelm. Then let's not waste the time we have. That night, they shared a quiet meal. Side by side. No words. Just the creak of the cabin settling. The whisper of the woods beyond. And the flicker of something unspoken but undeniable. In a cabin built from solitude. They had found each other. And even with shadows gathering beyond the trees, that was enough, for now. Blank. Blank. The fire crackled gently in the hearth, casting amber shadows across the wooden walls. Outside, night wrapped the forest in stillness. But inside the cabin, something was stirring, quiet and intimate. Clara sat on the floor near the fire, knees drawn up, her fingers curled around a warm mug. She glanced at Callum, who was sharpening a knife at the table. Silent but clearly distracted. The sparks of unease were growing outside the cabin walls. But tonight, they needed light, not fear. She broke the silence softly. Did you love her? Callum paused, blade mid-stroke. He didn't need to ask who. More than life, he said, but life didn't love us back. Clara watched his hands, strong. Careful, you talk about them like they're still close. They are, he replied, quietly, not in the way they were, but in how I remember them. In the things I try to do better now. He set the knife down and looked at her. His eyes weren't hard anymore. Just tired. Honest. Clara nodded. I think that's how we carry the people we lose. Not in grief, but in choosing who we become because of them. She sipped from her cup. The heat of the tea didn't match the warmth rising in her chest. Tell me about you, he said. She hesitated. No one had asked that in a long time. I was supposed to marry a doctor. She began, voice low. His name was Elias. Handsome, ambitious. Everyone thought we were perfect. But when the outbreak came, he left, said the risk was too high. I stayed. I held hands as people died. Stitched wounds no one else would touch. Callum's brows furrowed. And you never saw him again? She shook her head. He sent a letter. Said I was brave but foolish. Said he hoped I'd survive long enough to regret my choice. Callum let out a breath. He was wrong. I don't regret staying, Clara said, but I regret hoping he'd come back. The fire popped, and they both fell silent for a moment. I guess we're both fugitives of the past, she added with a faint smile. Callum chuckled, a rare sound. Deep and warm. I never thought I'd find company in the middle of nowhere. Let alone company like you. Clara's heart stilled, not from fear, from something softer. Hope, maybe, or the first echoes of something dangerously close to love. You think we can outrun what's coming? She asked. Callum looked at the fire. No, but maybe we don't need to. Maybe we just stand together when it gets here. She reached out, tentatively, and laid her hand over his. He didn't move, didn't flinch. His fingers, rough and warm, curled around hers slowly, deliberately. You're not who you were, she said, and I'm not alone anymore. The room held its breath. In that quiet cabin, surrounded by danger and haunted memories, two broken souls had finally begun to heal, not because they had forgotten the past, but because they had dared to share it. And in doing so, they had given each other something the world outside could never promise. A reason to keep going. Blank. Blank. The days had grown shorter. The sun dipped behind the pines earlier now, casting long, cold shadows across the clearing. The forest was quieter too quiet. But inside the cabin, a quiet strength had taken root. Clara and Callum no longer moved as strangers. There was rhythm in their routine, and something more in the way their eyes lingered just a moment too long. Callum had become vigilant, sharpening tools, reinforcing the door, keeping watch late into the night. But Clara understood now. It wasn't just about protecting the cabin. He was protecting her. One afternoon, Clara found him stacking firewood behind the cabin, sweat on his brow despite the chill in the air. She walked up silently and set down a small cloth bundle. Lunch, she said. He looked at the bundle, then at her. You didn't have to. She gave him a look, half teasing, half stern. You've been watching my every step for days. Let me watch yours. He didn't argue. Instead, he sat beside her on the woodpile, unwrapping the bread and dried apples. They ate in silence, the crisp air around them filled only with the gentle rustle of pine. Then, without looking up, Callum spoke. I never expected to care about anyone again. Clara glanced at him, her hands folding in her lap. He continued. After what I lost, after what I became, I figured I was just meant to fade out. Quiet, alone. But then I saw you, lying there by that post. And something made me stop. Clara's voice was soft. That something saved my life. He turned toward her, his eyes earnest. I didn't just bring you here to keep you safe. I brought you here because the moment I saw you, I knew, if I let you go, I'd never forgive myself. Not just because you needed help, but because I needed something to believe in again. Her breath caught. She wasn't used to words like that, not anymore. Not from a man who lived with ghosts. She reached for his hand, fingers threading through his. You've given me something too, Callum. You've reminded me that even in the darkest places, there's still light. A distant howl echoed through the trees. Both of them tensed, instinctively moving closer. He stood, rifle already in hand, scanning the horizon, but Clara remained beside him, a calm strength in her posture. We'll face it, she said, whatever comes. He looked at her, not like a protector to the protected, but as an equal, as someone worth standing beside. And in that moment, the bond between them was no longer just forged in survival. It was built in love. Not loud or grand, but quiet and enduring. A bond that didn't need promises to feel true. Just presence. Just choosing each other, over and over. Blank. Blank. The first sign was a dead bird on the porch. Clara found it just after sunrise, small, broken, its wings twisted unnaturally. She stared at it for a moment, a strange chill crawling up her spine. Callum appeared behind her, silent as always, but the second he saw it, his jaw clenched. It's a message, he muttered, stooping to gather the tiny corpse. They're close. They've been watching us? She asked, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. Callum nodded. Long enough to leave this where I'd see it. Clara took a slow breath. Then it's time. He looked at her, surprised by her calm. I'm not afraid, she said. You should be, he replied gently. They're not men who leave second chances. But I'm not the one who needs a second chance, she said, placing her hand over his heart. "You are, and you've earned it." Callum didn't speak. He just pulled her into a firm embrace, one that said everything words could not. By nightfall, the air had shifted. The forest no longer whispered, it watched. Shadows moved too deliberately. Branches cracked under feet not their own. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like the eye of a coming storm. Callum had prepared for this moment. Traps laid, ammunition counted, doors reinforced. He handed Clara a small revolver. She didn't flinch. "I pray we won't need it," she said. He nodded. "But if we do, I'll stand by you." They sat that night by the fire, closer than ever. Not talking, just listening to the silence between them. Clara's head rested against his shoulder. His hand held hers firmly, as if letting go now would undo all the healing they'd fought for. Then, just before dawn, it came. A whistle in the distance, low, slow, menacing. Callum stood instantly, his eyes hard, every muscle tight. "They're here." Clara rose too, spine straight, eyes clear. "Then let's meet them together." Love wasn't fragile now. It was armor. Hope wasn't naive. It was fire. They weren't just two souls hiding anymore, they were something stronger. Something that wouldn't break, even if the world outside tried to tear it down. Blank. Blank. The first shot shattered the morning calm. It rang through the trees like thunder, echoing off bark and stone. Clara ducked instinctively, but Callum was already moving, silent, swift, every step purposeful. He took his place by the window, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the shadows. 3 shapes emerged from the woods. Men, armed, confident. Clara stood behind Callum, revolver in hand, heart pounding but steady. She wasn't the same woman who had collapsed by the stagecoach post. She had found strength in herself. And in him. "They'll try to scare us first," Callum said softly. "Then they'll try to break in. Then we hold." He looked back at her and saw something fierce in her eyes. Not fear, resolve. A second shot rang out, hitting the edge of the window frame. Wood splintered. Callum returned fire, once, twice. The forest answered with silence. Then footsteps. Running. Fast. "They're flanking the left," he muttered, grabbing a second rifle. "Stay near the fireplace. If they break in, I won't leave you." He paused, just long enough to let those words sink in. Then the door burst open. The first man through was large, wild-eyed, shouting something incoherent, but he didn't get far. Callum met him with the butt of his rifle. Clara, steady and calm, fired once toward the second figure at the window. A warning shot, but it sent the man ducking for cover. It wasn't a battle. It was survival. Pure, precise. 10 minutes. That's all it took. And then, silence. Callum stepped onto the porch. Rifle still raised. Scanning. 2 men were gone, fled. 1 remained, groaning in the underbrush. Clara came to the doorway. Her breath held. "It's over," he said quietly. She stepped forward and hugged him tightly, like she never wanted to let go. They buried the past that day. Literally. The wounded man was treated, bound, and left with a map out of the woods. The message was clear. There is no revenge left here. Only a man and woman who have rebuilt something no bullet can take. In the days that followed, peace returned. Not the fragile peace of hiding, but the strong peace that comes after standing your ground. The cabin was still small. The woods still silent, but everything inside had changed. Callum smiled more now. Clara planted wildflowers. And every night, as they sat by the fire, no words were needed, because love had not only survived, it had bloomed. And hope, once a flicker in the dark, now burned steady and strong.